Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center, sponsored by Fieldstone Communities, Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers innovative and compassionate care. Now they're accepting residents. They also offer day stay and respite programs. So grab a pencil and jot down this number, 360-689-4314, to schedule a tour of Fieldstone's beautifully appointed apartments on Rolling Bay today. And I'd also like to acknowledge that the Senior Community Center is on the ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Suquamish tribe, the people of the clear salt water. We honor them and are grateful for their hospitality. Today, David Harrison checks in with his monthly review of national politics. David was the founder and executive director of the Northwest Policy Center at the University of Washington. As a senior lecturer, he taught policy analysis for many years at the university's Evans School. Good morning, David. Thanks for being with us again.
Good morning. As we've been discussing, I'm in La Push, so let me know. We'll work on it if the sound isn't coming through. Can you hear me okay right now? So. Yes. As we should remind, and please let me know if you stop being able to hear me. As you know, in addition to us as an audience, mostly regulars, we're getting 50 or 60 views a month from other people who click and watch our thoughts with each other. So that's very gratifying. As you know, each time I talk about 3 separate themes, and I'll stop after each theme to make sure that I can take whatever questions. Given that I'm on my cell today, we'll probably limit it to an hour, but we'll see what happens. The first theme is going to be all the legal challenges that are underway and their significance. And then in the second theme, I'm going to talk about what has to happen between now and November 8th for us to do as well as we'll hope to do. As you know, some of us have a deep abiding desire for us to keep the House under Nancy Pelosi's leadership. That is by no means a certainty, and I'll talk a little bit about what would have to happen for that to be so. And then thirdly, on a shorter segment, I'll talk about the 3 congressional races of consequence in Washington State, which turns out to be 2 more than we thought would be occurring. So first, let's get these legal issues sorted out, because right now there's an appeal to the Supreme Court that won't be granted, but it's good to figure out which is which. A lot of you and myself included have this abiding desire for Donald Trump to be charged with a felony one of these days. Keep in mind that the 2 people most likely to do that in no way are going to do it between now and November 8th. The Justice Department has an internal rule to not do things 60 days before an election that might affect the election. And of course, if the FBI director had honored that in 2016 and not commented on Hillary's emails, then Hillary would have been president and we wouldn't have had this storm in our country these last 6 years. But Merrick Garland is not going to charge with Donald Trump with election fraud or obstructing justice or anything like that between now and November 8th. Likewise, Fonnie Willis, the prosecutor in Fulton County, Georgia, will wait till after November 8th for any indictments for election fraud there. I wanted to note that this is nonetheless a gift that keeps on giving. We're all too susceptible to the idea that Trump's support never changes. But in fact, it does. It's diminished slightly each month since he took office in 2016. And independents don't like presidents walking off with top secret documents. It's irritating to them. So these stories, these recurring stories where Trump gets charged with something and he says it's a witch hunt, are all over time diminishing his so-called movement. Keep in mind also that there are actions underway charging Trump's lieutenants. Steve Bannon has yet to be sentenced for contempt of Congress for refusing to testify to the January 6th committee. He's already been tried. So there will be a sentence there unless he all of a sudden has a change of heart. He also has a big lawsuit. As some of you know, there's a major criminal suit against he and some folks for the organization they started to take donations to build a wall. What happened is they made a commitment that 100% of the dollars received would go toward building the wall, and then he'd set up a elaborate scam to take $1 million or so of that money. So he's very susceptible. There are some other problems for lieutenants. Peter Navarro, likewise, is about to go on trial for contempt of Congress for refusing the subpoena for the November 6th committee. And the person who's in the most trouble will be Giuliani, because whatever charges Merrick Garland files against Trump, he's twice as likely to file against Giuliani. That is, even if there were some belief that Trump shouldn't be treated as above the law, there's no prosecutor that's worried about charging Giuliani. So in particular, Giuliani's very aggressive involvement in trying to establish fake electors. So all those things are going on. My favorite one that's under the radar is the $1.6 billion lawsuit by Dominion Voting against Fox News. That's underway now. It's in the discovery stage. And they have evidence that Fox executives knew that Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity were saying indefensible things about Dominion's voting machines, things that were known to be untrue in terms of secret algorithms and programming those machines. And the standards are high for those damages, but I think over time, Fox is in big trouble because they basically destroyed the ability of Dominion to sell their product. I mean, if you're a MAGA conservative, the thing you're on alert for is if your county clerk decides to sign a contract with Dominion. So they're going to be able to establish damages. On the Trump-specific front, it's very complicated with regard to Trump housing classified materials and other things that belong in the archives. What there is to keep in mind is there's two things happening at the same time. As you may remember, in Trump's pocket, District Judge Cannon has told the special master that he cannot, that the special master cannot require Trump to provide an inventory of the documents that would prove that Trump's lying about the FBI planting documents. The special master wanted to do that. But two good things have happened. The appeal to the Supreme Court right now by Trump has to do with the appellate court letting the FBI move forward immediately with top secret and highly classified documents. So what's happening there is the appellate court, including two Trump appointees, overruled the trial court judge and allowed the FBI to go forward in their inspection of 100 or more highly classified documents. Trump has appealed that decision to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court won't hear it right now. Clarence Thomas, of all people, is handling the filings because they split up circuits. But the chances that there's 4 votes on the Supreme Court to hear that appeal are 0, in my view. And then the same 11th Circuit panel is working on appeal from the Department of Justice with regard to what they get to do now with the non-classified material. And they too will, as they did before, they're doing an expedited hearing, and they're slapping Judge Cannon's hands as they go along. So on that front, we're all happy to see that the case with regard to the National Archives is ongoing, and that it will always be, it'll be in the news for some time. It will be in the news for some time, and it'll always be good news for us. It's a great issue for us with independents who they just, anytime you hear the FBI say that it could disclose sources, CIA say it could disclose sources and methods, that's great stuff for us. So we should be happy that it's going on and on. And then to summarize, there's three big cases that make our hearts sing. Letitia James has filed a $250 million tax fraud case in the state of New York with a possible criminal referral. But in that case, this is all about Trump's organization inflating real estate values of their properties in order to get favorable loans from banks, and then deflating the same dollars, the same values when they're paying their taxes, which is fraudulent. Let it be said that there's a lot of leeway in how that's done. So you have to be a real crook to get this lawsuit filed against you, because valuations, are sometimes subjective, but these valuations are so excessive, sometimes times 10 the actual value that Letitia James believes she has a case. And in fact, the Trump organization was in negotiation with her all until she filed the civil suit. So that would be paying an amount and not pleading to any criminal wrongdoing. And so the fact that they were in negotiations was compelling. The other thing to remember is Trump took the fifth 400 times in his deposition with regard to this case. It's important to remember that in criminal cases, if you take the Fifth Amendment and say that you're not going to incriminate yourself, it's well-established law that that's not to be held against you. Civil cases are different. If you take the Fifth Amendment and it's a civil case that's held, it's a trial just by the judge or by the jury, they can view the refusal of a witness to give information as meaningful and compelling. They don't have to disregard Trump's Fifth Amendment, the taking of the Fifth Amendment as they would if it were a criminal trial. So remember, that's great stuff. And it means at minimum, there's going to be a massive settlement in this tax fraud case, or at maximum, Trump will take it all the way to trial, and the judge will make Trump pay a huge fine. The chances that he'll have to go to jail over this with criminal charges being filed eventually are significantly less than the other two cases you know about. One is my number one favorite, and that is Fulton County, Georgia, which has a grand jury underway charging Trump, not just for the Raffensperger call, where he asked Raffensperger to find 12,000 more votes, the Secretary of State in Georgia, but Trump and his cronies would also be charged with all sorts of elaborate schemes to establish fake electors in Georgia to cast fake electoral votes. So Fani Willis has expanded that search. And then finally, it's what Merrick Garland will do. I'm convinced, as I've told this group before, that Merrick Garland will file felony charges against Trump. I'm not sure that's going to be for the insurrection itself. That's a pretty high standard to prove that those folks entered the Capitol because Trump told them to. But the Merrick Garland's been doing a lot of work on the fraudulent elector states across the country, and I think that's the number one most likely criminal charge from him. So that's the legal report for today. We're remembering that this is a gift that's going to give to us all the way up to the presidential elections 2 years and a month from now. So we should be happy for it. I don't know that it's so important that Trump ever wear an orange jumpsuit, but I do think it's important that at some time he be convicted of a felony. And I think the likelihood that will happen is pretty large. Keep in mind, for all the people that tell you what a horrible precedent it would be for a subsequent administration to successfully try a former president, what an awful thing that would be. There is something more awful than that, and that is not doing it. When somebody tries to overthrow the government of the United States and prevent the peaceful transfer of power from one administration to another, that's the first time that's happened. Aaron Burr tried it a little bit. He tried to raise an army in New Orleans to take over the South, and he was tried for treason. So let's keep in mind that this is an untypical thing, and that Washington and Jefferson and Madison would be severely disappointed in Donald Trump. And it's more important to him to be brought to justice than to set some precedent that presidents are above the law. Questions, thoughts, and concerns about the legal report?
Yeah, raise your hand if you have a question, a thought. I have a thought. I just wonder, how many decades of corruption in New York City did Donald Trump do, and the people that he paid off or had working for him through his, shenanigans with property assessments, where there's assessors.
Maureen Dowd and others have argued that the culture of corruption in New York real estate is huge, and what happened with Trump is that he transferred that culture from his real estate organization to his presidential operation. So obviously that doesn't excuse anything. When you're overvaluing a property by 10 times, or in the case where there's already been prosecution, when you're paying millions of dollars off the books to your employees so that they can avoid taxation. When you're doing it that it's wrong. And it's actually true that when you get a doctor to certify that you have bone chips so that you don't have to be drafted, that's wrong too. The fact that you grew up in a culture where other people were criminals too doesn't excuse it. We've had plenty of elected officials who wouldn't do such a thing.
Yeah. But there's so many people that are struggling with housing and stuff right now, and you see these jerks getting away with this for decades, or maybe even 100 years. And I mean, I just am so always surprised that we're not out in the streets with torches and pitchforks.
Well, I think the American people are dulled to this kind of, I think first, 40% of the American people are 35. Have formed a narrative that whatever Trump can be charged with is just part of a cabal that's going to charge him with anything. So maybe 35%. For the other 65%, there's some of us who are relentless pursuers of justice. A certain number of people think that the American system is rife with corruption. I don't think it is. I've worked for a lot of electeds that are just really honorable, incredibly honorable people. But I think it's fair to say that there's too much money in American politics. You could say that for sure.
Or you could just, if you watch regular television and watching ads, they're just blatant lies. And and because of, Citizens United is allowed. So it's, I have to just turn that off and not watch it, record everything and just fast forward through them myself. So, how about everybody else? You enjoying those commercials?
So, should I go on with the second topic? Or
Yeah, I don't see anybody unless somebody has a question or comment. All right.
So in this next segment, I'm going to predict what's going to happen. So you're not necessarily going to be thrilled by it. So we've talked about this a lot. What is the best news that could happen between now and November 8th so that Pelosi could keep the House? Keep in mind that we're much closer to losing the House than we would be if some genius hadn't thought in the last election to coin the phrase defund the police. It's just so incredibly stupid. It doesn't get you more police reform to use the words defund the police. And in fact, 250 police departments did significant reforms post George Floyd's awful killing, the awful killing of George Floyd. What that did was cost us a good 10 seats at the margin, and that's why we're so close, and we're so much in danger that Kevin McCarthy will be Speaker of the House. Remember, if that happens and we keep the Senate in the presidency, that still the next 2 years will be significantly different. It will be all about passing basic bills and about playing defense and watching McCarthy do and his caucus do outrageous enough things that it helps us win the presidency 2 years from now. So we're up to 70 or 80% chance that we're going to lose the House, which mostly has to do with what happens in off-year elections. The president in power almost always loses seats. What would have to happen to keep that from happening? First, the vote opposing the court on the Dobbs decision has to be powerful. And there is some evidence that women in swing states are registering at a higher rate than men. Normally, the new registration rate runs about 50-50 or 52-48. And there's a Democratic consultant that through September looked at registration rates and is finding a lot of rates higher than that, where women are registering at a higher rate than men. That would be nothing but a good thing. Obviously, some of those would be anti-choice, but we'd have the majority. So we're hoping that there's something there. There's also a day coming up that's the biggest day till the election, and that is October 13th, next week. And that is the next inflation number. That number has to be encouraging news. If that number is, well, the Fed is not making a dent, that hurts a lot. If that number is, now we can see real progress in the Fed strategy, with food prices not going up as fast and whatever's happening with gas prices, that's going to help. The number to watch, as I've mentioned before on this call, is the generic congressional vote. In that question, people polling are saying, are you going to vote for the Democrat or Republican for Congress? And it doesn't mention the name. There's some recent generic polls that have us as +3. If we run +3 in the congressional vote across the country, we'll save the House. But there are other pollsters have us at -1 or -2 or even. So you want to watch that. But the two things that are most driving it are what people feel about inflation and what people feel about abortion. What the Democrats are trying to do is add crime to that. And you'll see a lot of the recent ads that you're seeing on the tube are about crime, and they're trying to open up another issue, What we're trying to do, of course, is have this election be all about choice. That's our number one argument. What else could happen? The usual. Trump could do something really outrageous. That's always a help in terms of independent voters, or Trump acolytes, which is what's happening in Arizona. Basically, that was an even election going in. And what the Republican election denialists are doing is throwing away their chance to hold the governorship or to defeat Mark Kelly. So in some states, the Republican response is so Trumpian that we have an extra advantage. I also think Ukraine plays to our advantage. If Zelensky continues to advance in Russian-held territory, I think that's a good thing. And perversely, another good thing, believe it or not, as much as you hate it, is Biden having a joint press conference with Ron DeSantis. So it shows that we're all Americans when we're in deep distress. It's true that the last big hurricane, DeSantis, when he was congressman, voted against aid because he did. But it is also true that it's nothing but a good thing for a sitting president to be sitting side by side with a usually antagonistic Republican governor. It just is. So those are the good things. The bad things are basically the reverse of the good things. If the Roe v. Wade support wanes, or the biggest bad thing that could happen is definitely if the inflation number on the 13th shows that it's unabated. That's not what you want. That could cost us 2% of the vote right there. The one thing to most watch, as I mentioned, is the generic vote. You want it north of 3%. Questions, thoughts, concerns about this? Oh, I'm sorry, I got to add something. I left it all out. My predictions. I think we're in trouble in the House. I'm not going to say we're not going to do it, but if I had to make a prediction, I'd say that we would lose 12 seats and have a narrow minority. In the Senate, I hereby predict that we'll pick up Pennsylvania, that John Fetterman will succeed. I hereby boldly predict that Tim Ryan is going to sell himself as a working class Democrat in Ohio and beat J.D. Vance. I hereby predict that we're going to lose Nevada with Cortez Masto losing to Adam Laxalt, who, even though he's Pete Domenice's son, is a creep. And that we will win only one of the two other major competitive races. It's either Wisconsin with Mandela Barnes or North Carolina with Sherry Beasley. So we'll win Pennsylvania, Ohio, and one of those other two, and we would lose Nevada. We would lose Florida, where we have that wonderful Val Demings, and we would end up +2. So we would end up at 52 from our present. We would take 3 and lose 1. New Hampshire's not a problem. Other places where we're defending. That would get us to 52 from our present 50, and it would have the excellent effect of decreasing Joe Manchin's hold on the caucus, because then you can pass reconciliation without his vote. The problem there is reconciliation doesn't matter if we lose the House. It would still be good to get to 52, but not as good as it would be if we somehow squeak by in the House. Then having 52 senators gives Schumer multiple more ways to get to yes. Also remember that once this election is over, it's all about positioning for 2 years from now. Sometimes after it's over, it'll become obvious that Joe Biden is not going to run at the age of 82. It's not going to happen. So everybody from Kamala Harris to Buttigieg to Amy Klobuchar is behaving themselves, and Gavin Newsom, and eventually they won't they won't do awful things, but they won't give extra deference to Joe Biden. What they will all try and do if Kevin McCarthy is Speaker is paint those Republicans as a bunch of crazies, which would not be hard to do because they're a bunch of crazies. You're talking about the caucus being taken over by people who would not be recognized by the Republicans who were in power back when I used to work in DC. So that's just the Jennifer Dunn, who was a long time Washington Republican, would not believe this strain of Republicanism. It's so ironic to have Donald Trump use Rhino, Republican in name only. He is in no way a traditional Republican, and have him be the arbiter of who's a real Republican is outrageous. My mentor, the former Republican governor of Michigan, Bill Milliken, has got to be turning over in his grave. This is amazing. Trump has hijacked an American political party. So those are my predictions. That's the good things that need to happen. Watch for that inflation number on the 13th, and watch and see if Trump does some really abnormally, even for him, stupid thing between now and November 8th. That would help. The continued intensity of the Roe v. Wade abortion protection crowd is also a huge issue. And we have a month left. So for those of you who watch this and are in terms of as donors, in my blog, I sent out 6 ways to give money at this stage where it would be put to good and immediate use. And if you email me at dsh347@gmail.com, I'll send you those 6 ways having to do with a PAC in Wisconsin, having to do with Mi Familia Vota, and a host of other ways to intervene immediately. Swing Left also has an immediate impact fund where they're putting money out weekly based upon recent polls. So if you're the kind of person who doesn't want to sort and wants to give money to one source, Swing Left's immediate impact fund is where to go. Also save money for your coffee on Bainbridge Island. I don't want any destitution based upon this race. If we have to feed Karen King and her sweetie, then that's one thing, but let's not all go to down that path. Any questions on my predictions?
Robert Golden has a comment here in the chat. Does the January committee have a surprise to affect the independent vote left to reveal?
I think, as you know, things have been in production all along. And they're having their last hearing next week. So we can hope that that production includes something that they think is has some zing to it. And remember that they've done a lot of, it's not just Ginny Thomas they've interviewed, they've done a lot of interviewing. I don't know that they have something special that could move 2% of the vote. I hope they do. I'm not necessarily certain that they do.
Yeah.
Other
Sheila. Yeah, Sheila.
I have 2 things, David. I think you mentioned something about Georgia, and I'd like to hear what you had to say about Georgia and the Senate race. And the second thing is that I heard by the grapevine somewhere that Kevin McCarthy probably won't be Speaker of the House. Who might be instead of him?
Oh. Mm.
I don't agree that Kevin McCarthy won't be Speaker of the House. I think anybody to the right of him will not defeat him, and there's no obvious candidate to the moderate side of him because there's only 30 or so moderates left. He's playing it. He played the whole right after January 6th. He said, "I'm done with Donald Trump," and ever since then, he's sorry that he said that, but I think if there was some obvious emerging candidate, but Jim Jordan doesn't have the broader support of the caucus, so I don't agree that that's in question. And remember, being minority leader gives you a distinct advantage, because what happens is if you're leading an effort to dethrone the king, he's the king now, being minority leader, never try and overthrow the king without being successful, because the king gets irritated, and it would take some committee ranking minorities and some other leaders, people who've had 5-6 terms, and Kevin McCarthy knows exactly how to show that he's disappointed in them. So there's a lot of power that he's wielding already that would make it hard to have a insurrection. Now, if Trump came out boldly against Kevin McCarthy, I don't think even that would work. And he's not going to do that because Kevin McCarthy has kissed the hem of his garment month after month. On Georgia, I didn't really mention it. I think that race is over. I think Warnock's got, I don't think Stacey Abrams is going to win. No. And that's partly because Brian Kemp has stood up to Trump, giving Brian Kemp more independent votes than Herschel Walker. There's been so many disclosures about Herschel Walker, and he's such an awful candidate on the issues and on his articulation of the issues. I saw a +6 the other day for Warnock, and I believe that once you have today it came out that the person who's saying that Herschel Walker paid for her abortion is one of his ex-wives. So it's going to be hard for him to continue to say that wasn't him. And meanwhile, he's got his 23-year-old son who's a conservative influencer hammering him every day. I just don't think Herschel Walker can win. So the only seat I'm worried that we're going to give up is Nevada. Oh. It's just that's why one of the reasons I pushed Be Familiar Voters so much, because Latino vote in Nevada is huge, and we could win. We did last time because of the Latino vote. So I'll go on to my third unit if there are no questions. So in our last segment for today, I want to talk about that unexpectedly there are 3 races of interest in Washington. So in Wenatchee, Yakima area, some of you have gotten solicitations from a man named Doug White. And Doug White, being a great campaigner, called me in February. And you know that somebody's thorough if they're calling me, because I'm not on the top of the call this person food chain in Washington State. And Doug White is a great campaigner and a good guy, and he is not going to win. The reason he's not going to win is he's running against Dan Newhouse, who was being opposed by Lauren Culp in the primary. So what Doug White was hoping for is that the crazy Lauren Culp, who's the former one-person police chief of Roslyn, was going to win the primary, and then Doug White would come in the center, and there would be so many Republicans and independents that wouldn't vote for Lauren Culp that he would prevail. It's worth noting that Jay Inslee used to hold that seat, so there's got to be some Democrats over there. What would have to happen is Republicans in that very, very conservative district would have to be so angry with Dan Newhouse over him voting for impeachment that they would vote for Doug White or not vote. And that's certainly true of the party establishment, who thinks that, they would vote for Donald Trump for Pope. So they're very annoyed at Dan Newhouse. What happened to Dan Newhouse is he looked in the mirror in the morning of the impeachment vote and couldn't live with himself not impeaching Trump over the insurrection. So good for him. I think he'll survive. I just think there are too many Republican votes in that district. Meanwhile, over in Bellevue is a second district that Republicans were always supposed to win. That was David Reichert's seat and Jennifer Dunn's before him. And as you know, Kim Schreier won that seat 2 years after Trump. She won it in 2018. With Bainbridge Island's help, we've raised a lot of money for her on Bainbridge, including $25,000 in the summer. Kim Schreier got 48% in the primary, and all the Republican candidates shared about 50%. I think she's good to go. I think her advertising is outstanding. It is hard to establish yourself as an independent person within a political structure, and I think she'll be fine. I think that's a 53% race, which leads us with an unexpectedly close race from in Vancouver, Washington, up north of Olympia. That was a seat held by the moderate Jamie Herrera Butler, who also voted for impeachment. And what happened there is 2 years ago, we ran an outstanding candidate named Carolyn Long, which a lot of us supported. And Jamie Herrera Butler got 56% of the vote when we thought it was going to be close. So now it's different than the Doug Wright race, because the people who didn't vote for Joe Kent, who's the winger running for it, are to the center, not to the right. So basically, Marie Gluesenkamp Perez, who's a blue-collar Democrat, owns an auto shop, and who parenthetically is against gun control, is fine on all other issues, and she has a chance to flip that seat. We have a chance in Washington State to win back a seat for Nancy Pelosi and for all of us, and partly because the New York Times has established quite well that Joe Kent is crazy. He's talking about putting Anthony Fauci on trial for murder. He says that COVID is made up and invented by us, and he's for he's a Putin supporter or apologist against Zelensky. So there's got to be some independent votes or some people who used to vote for Jamie Herrera Butler who are going to be motivated by that. Marie Gluesenkamp Perez got 32% in the primary. That means she needs 18% more from but which would be maybe not even around a half of Herrera Butler's support. And this is possible. So if you're interested in this at all, we're doing a Bainbridge Zoom for her on Thursday night at 7. And you can use that email and I'll send you the information. So there'll be 40 or 50 Islanders hearing her story and maybe giving her a little bit of dough. And so that's my report on the 3 Washington seats. If we could take back one, hold Kim Schreier's seat, we'll be doing our share of the national Protect the House campaign. So that's what we're trying to do. So next time we get together, it'll be right before the election. So It'll be the Friday before the Tuesday election. So it should be exciting, and hopefully by then we'll have good generic polls and good inflation numbers, and we'll be feeling good about our prospects.
It's a huge deal. So, well, thank you so much, David, and we will see you October 4th.